Excel 2007 Data Integrity. There are two main tasks that we are going to carry out in this nugget. The first thing is formula auditing. We'll do some troubleshooting to make sure that our formulas are based off of the right cells so that we have data integrity, so that we're not creating calculations that aren't really taking into consideration the right pieces of data. Also, we just flat out might have some errors in our formulas, and it's nice to be able to troubleshoot to really watch how this formula is carried out so we can see, hey, okay, I get it. I'm going to go fix that piece of information that I need to fix. Also, we are going to use the data validation commands. We can actually limit the type of information that's brought into our spreadsheet. If someone types in something we don't want, they'll get an error message that says, hey, try again, try this. Also, with data validation, you can create a list of entries. So someone who's entering information can click on a drop-down, see what their options are, instead of just guessing and perhaps typing something incorrectly. As we know, it's so easy to mistype when we're doing quite a bit of data entry, or hey, even when we're not doing quite a bit of data entry. So let's go ahead and jump in here and make sure we have data with integrity. Let's go ahead and launch the Sport Shop orders. This is similar to something we've seen in a previous nugget. We're taking orders for our Sport Shop. We have SKUs and product gloves and price, size, quantity totals. We give a discount price. We calculate the discount price, and of course, we have some notes. A lot of formulas exist within this. For example, we've got a VLOOKUP here for this product batting glove. This VLOOKUP is based off of, oh, well, this SKU, but it also goes out and looks on the inventory sheet onto a range that we've named inventory. We also have a few other VLOOKUPs here that do the same thing. Our total is based off of a calculation, price times quantity. Our discount price is based off an if statement. If either one of these cells here is greater than a certain number, then we give that discount. Otherwise, we say, hey, no discount. In our notes field also, we have an if statement, just one if criteria. If D5, if the size is large, then we're going to say, sorry, we're out of stock. Otherwise, we'll say thanks for your order. So there are quite a few formulas in here. And of course, there are potential errors that occur when you create formulas, because a couple things can happen. Your initial formula could not be correct, or you could move some of the data that exists in any of the source locations, which could leave you with an error. So let's take a look at some of the auditing tricks that we have. The first thing we do is we select a cell that has a formula, and then we can use this area here and either trace the precedence, meaning the cells that this formula is based off of, or we could also trace the dependence, meaning cells, it'll point out to cells that are dependent on the data that comes as a result of this formula or the value of this cell. Let's trace the precedence first. So these blue dots indicate cells that precede our discount price. Now, we know it's an if statement, so it tests cell C5, that's why C5 is selected. It also tests cell E5, that's why E5 is selected. And then it also takes a look at the total, because that's part of the if true portion. We multiply the total times 0.9. These are the precedents for this formula. Are there any dependents on our discount price? Let's check it out. All right, there's one dependent on our discount price. We see the arrow indicates dependence. We only have one. The order total is dependent on that. Let's take a look at a couple more. If we click on this, thanks for your order, and choose trace precedence, it gives us a couple more dots. Notice how, though, it's a little bit difficult to tell where the items are for discount price versus notes. So in this situation, we could remove arrows. We could remove just the precedent arrows for this, or we could remove arrows for everything within our entire spreadsheet. Let's try this one again. We'll trace our precedents. Now it's a little bit easier to read. We only have one precedent, cell D5. Can remove the arrow. And let's take a look now at batting glove. This is our vertical lookup. Do we have any precedents here? All right, we do. We come from the SKU number, batting glove, looks at cell A5, which is the skew. Look at this dashed line. This indicates, hey, there's a range somewhere else. It's not pointing directly to this spreadsheet. We can look at this dashed line here and double click on it. For that, it says, you know what? sportshoporders.xls within square brackets. That's the syntax for a file, and we can tell, yes, this file is called sportshoporders.xls. Inventory, exclamation mark, always indicates a sheet. Exclamation mark says, hey, you're talking about a sheet here. And then, of course, this is an absolute referenced range of cells. We can click cancel. We can remove our arrows. Let's do one more of these items. Quantity. Let's trace dependence. All right, discount price. Do we have any precedents? Nope. So it does tell you, hey, you have to have an active cell that contains a formula which includes valid references to see those precedents or also the dependence. So far we haven't had any errors in our cells, but since a lot of these items are dependent on this skew being here, I'm going to delete it. Now look, we have NA formulas, and when we click here, we have that little green triangle indicates we've got a problem. This says value not available for error. We can of course go out to help on this error, which just tells us in Microsoft Help, as it always does, what an NA means. Hey, missing data. All right, we could have probably figured that one out on our own just by looking here. We can ignore this error. We could edit the formula in the formula bar. It just simply puts our cursor up there. We can also choose our error checking options. Here, it launched Excel options. These are the same items that we capture if we go to our Office button. I'll show you in a second, but go into Excel options from there. So we're in the formulas area. We've got our calculation options. All right. We have automatic calculation. That's usually the best way to do it. What that means is it's going to recalculate a workbook every time a value that's affecting a formula changes. It's automatic. Oh, okay, well, you changed cell A5, bam, I'm going to recalculate it. For the most part, that's what you want. But if you have values in other workbooks or other sheets that drive a formula, you might want to do this manually, and it only is going to recalculate before you save. This was a good thing in older versions of Excel when your processor wasn't so great, you didn't have a lot of memory, you didn't have really a big, huge machine to work with. Here, in this day and age, people that are installing Excel 2007 usually have more bulky processors and bigger machines to get the job done. You could also choose automatic except for data tables. We'll talk about data tables when we get into some of our goal seeking and what if scenarios in a different nugget. But the idea here is you can have a data table that holds scenarios, and it really kind of gives you versions of what can happen to different areas of data. So you can have different data tables for different scenarios. What if I try to save my money at 6% interest versus a different data table? What if I try to save my money at 4% interest? That's just one small example. We also have these calculations, enable iterative calculation, which means how many times is it going to go through and recalculate that same workbook. And that's going to, of course, depend on what type of calculation you have. I really don't have any iterative calculations in here. That's something that you might do with a very math-intensive type of formula that has to check the same data over and over again. Iterations are really loops in checking data. As you've probably guessed, so far what we're looking at isn't really helping our NA error. My point here is just showing you that when you do have errors, it can bump you into this dialog box, which might be part of your problem. So far looking here though, formula autocomplete. That means when I create a formula and I miss the ending parenthesis, it'll fill that in for me automatically. Use table names and formulas. All these items enable background error checking. Just means behind the scenes, it's going to take a look and see if there are errors. That green triangle is green as a result of this choice. This is all right here, kind of fluffy, the green, but it could be helpful. As far as these error checking rules go, cells containing formulas that result in an error, yeah, we want to enable error checking for that. If we have years represented as 2 digits, maybe we want error checking, maybe not. The way Excel does it is it pretty much figures you're talking about the year 2000 if you type in a 00 or a 01 up to the year 29. So if you type in a 30 in a cell, Excel figures you're talking about 1930. If you type a 29 in a cell, with the date format, 01/15/29, it assumes you're talking about 2029. You can change those if you want to at a different place. This is just saying, hey, are we going to check these or not? We are also looking at this one. Formula is inconsistent with other formulas in the region. Well, we've seen that error on a previous nugget. It really thinks, hey, if you're in a column, you're probably going to need the same type of formula throughout this entire column. If you don't have that same formula, it gives you a little indicator and says, you know what, something might be off here. Recheck your work. Formulas which omit cells in a region kind of figures that you might not have meant to do that, that you meant to calculate the entire range. It also can take a look at unlocked cells. Data entered in a table is invalid. It takes a look at that. But notice it's not going to refer to empty cells. We used to have this issue. If we had a formula that spanned an empty cell, you'd get an error. Now, finally, Microsoft has figured out that sometimes you just want empty cells in a range. Maybe you'll fill them in at a later time. That's why they're part of that calculation. So if you like the fact that Excel has changed and will allow empty cells as part of a formula, leave this unchecked. So as you've probably gathered, this was good information for how Excel carries out formula error checking and really what's happening behind the scenes, but that did not help us solve this NA. Let's see what happens if we click Trace Dependence. It's really just going to point back to that SKU, and of course we have the same option here, Sport Shop Orders Inventory. So it's not so much telling us exactly how to fix this problem. That's why you have to have an idea of the syntax of your formulas and really just use some critical thinking to discover, okay, well, A5, it's empty. I better put something in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, there we go. If you have a formula that's giving you something that you don't think it should be giving you, price, that makes sense, right? Well, let me break this. Let me change that. I'm going to change that to our vertical lookup, grabbing the data out of column 2 in our range instead of column 3, which is price. Well, we would look at this and think, hey, something's fishy here. So we could do this tool right here, our Evaluate Formula tool. That's, of course, on our formula ribbon in our formula auditing. What this does is it evaluates it step by step, and we can either step into it or we could evaluate. If we click Evaluate, it's going through each item. It first went to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now it's evaluating inventory, and it tells you what happened there. Each time it gives you a result. So let's restart that. What it does is it goes through your formula step by step, and it lets you know what's being evaluated, and at the very end it tells you the result of the evaluation. So first it evaluates A5, then it evaluates the named range of inventory, and it figures out that inventory is actually on the inventory sheet A2 through D82, and then it evaluates that to batting glove. Restart. Step in is going to show you this one by one. Step out. Now we're on the second part. Step into that. Okay. Inventory really is a named range that ties to that. Step out. Evaluate. So there's only a few steps in this, but your formulas are calculated so quickly, it's nice to see actually what is occurring. So from that we gathered, A, we're citing the wrong item to display. That should be a 3. Our column index number should be a 3. That's accurate. We have this item right here too, which is our error checking. It just goes through the entire worksheet and looks for errors. Let's try this error checking again. All right, we've got an error with our VLOOKUP. Do I want help on this error? Do I want to show the calculation steps like we just did? Do I want to ignore the error, or do I want to edit in the formula bar? Do I want to resume? All right, what are my options here? We've just seen this dialog box before. Basically, this button here does the same thing that that little icon here does for us. Trace error is the same thing as tracing the precedence that we had done previously. Circular references are something that we don't have here, but that is always an error in Excel. A circular reference is when the cell that contains your formula is also part of the range of cells that that formula is trying to evaluate. It's a circular reference because you're referencing that cell twice, as the formula and as some of the base information for that formula. Let's remove our arrows. This last item we have here is show formulas. This is pretty neat. It changes all the data to actually be the formulas. And I'm just going to fix this so we don't have our error anymore. So this button right here will toggle you between actually seeing the results of a formula calculation and showing you the formulas. The watch window is pretty fantastic. What it's going to do is it's going to dock its cell where you can actually move it to float around, and you can add formulas into this. Let's see, let's put this formula back in here. All right, add this formula in there, or I could have just selected that and chosen add watch. Add. Okay, so we've got two formulas in here. It's showing us the values. It shows us the formulas also. So as I'm making changes here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 9, we'll just do that again. My items are updating. It's not showing us anything except for the fact that this is all the data in that cell. These are how the values are updating for us. Why in the world do we care about that? Well, maybe you're just curious why certain or how certain cells within your spreadsheet are being affected by just simple data entry that you're making, or maybe you're doing some troubleshooting after all, and it lets you know, A, do you have a problem like we do here, or B, are you getting the information that you're trying to get by modifying the contents in the cells? And I mentioned the reason why this is helpful is if you have a very large spreadsheet. I might have a couple hundred, a couple thousand rows of information. So I'd have to scroll up and down. Okay, did that cell, let's see, did that cell G400 change? Nope, it didn't. I'm going to scroll back up to cell G6. Let me make my change. Oh, let me scroll back down. So with this watch window, you can have it open and you can really be looking at cells from throughout your spreadsheet just within this little window. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we see that this changed as well. Of course, you can choose that you want to delete something from here, delete something from here, and again, it floats around, or you could dock it to the top. It all depends on how much real estate you have and how you like to work. This is the watch window. You can toggle it on and off, just like this. Calculation, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see it. It goes off the edge of your screen. It is the same thing that we had when we went into our Excel options here under formulas. That was this, workbook calculation, automatic except for data tables, or manual. This is the same thing, just lets you know, do I want to calculate my sheet now? Do I want to wait until later? So this calculate button really allows you to make sure you refresh your information so that you have the most up-to-date data reflected in your spreadsheet. So because you can have data spanning workbooks, worksheets, this calculate button allows you to choose right now, I want to calculate it and make sure the data that I'm looking at as a result of all my formulas here are accurate based on the source. So our spreadsheet is accurate as far as the formulas go. But what happens when someone else gets in here and starts entering order information? How can we make sure that the data is intact and it is correct? That's where our data validation comes in. Here on our data ribbon, we have a couple choices with data validation. We can actually have a nice dialog box that pops up with an error if someone breaks the rules. We can even have a list of information that someone can choose from instead of typing from scratch. So let's first of all test for our quantity. If someone's putting an order in there, we don't want them to put something that equals 0 in there, right? It needs to be greater than 0. Here's our data validation dialog box. By default, hey, we allow anything. Do we want a whole number, only decimals, date, time? Do we want to limit the amount of characters in a cell? Maybe we are entering in the state and we are using the 2-character state code, OHCANY, and we don't want NYC in there. In our situation, we're doing quantity, so whole number makes sense. Ignore blank, sure. Or we could have it no blank cells allowed in there. Our data between, equal to, not equal to, we want greater than 0. It's a pretty simple logical command, but it needs to be a whole number greater than 0. Well, what's our input message? This is not doing data validation. This is just giving the people an idea of what they're supposed to do in this cell when their pointer hovers over that. We'll come back to that. Here's our error alert. Show error alert after invalid data is entered. Yeah. Do we want a icon here? Yeah, we want the stop icon. What would our title be? How about invalid data? Something that users would understand. Values must be greater than 0. All right, so it'll say stop. The title will just be invalid data, and specifically values must be greater than 0. Okay, so let's try it out. What's 0? Enter. Ooh, value must be greater than 0. Invalid data, everything we did there. We want to retry that? Okay, we'll put a 5 in there. It's fine. All right, we try to put text in there. It says no, because we said we're only going to accept whole numbers. Retry, put a 5 back in there. Let's go back into data validation here, and I just want to show you that input message. This is an input message. Please enter a quantity greater than 0. Okay, there we go. The title, this is an input message. Please enter a quantity greater than 0. Goes away, we click it again, and it tells us. Takes up a lot of real estate space here, so you're going to have to evaluate, hey, do my users need this extra information? If so, make it as clear as possible so that you don't waste their time, and hey, you don't waste your own time for putting this information in here. All right, we also could create a list here. We'll go back to settings. In our SKU, any value, we'd like to create a list of information. Now, you might recall we had this inventory tab with all sorts of data. We can't go to that tab. Good thing I knew that. I ended up putting this information down here. I copied it down here. You have millions of cells available to you in Excel, so you could, well, actually millions of rows and thousands of columns. So you could actually put this range far, far away so no one would ever see it and no one would ever come across it. I'm going to collapse this. This is the source for my range. I'll choose OK. Scroll back up to where we were, and here is our list. Now my users, it still might be difficult because they might not have all these SKUs memorized. Hopefully they have some sort of reference so they know what it is. But just for the purpose of this exercise, isn't that a lot easier to be able to change the SKU? When you click outside the cell, the arrow goes away. Make another selection. There we go. We got lots of tennis rackets in here, evidently. There we go. There's our bat and glove. We also have circle invalid data as a selection here. Before we circle invalid data, we have to indicate what invalid data is. So let's go back. We're in the quantity field again. We want a whole number. This time we want it between 1 and, let's say we don't sell any more than 50 of a product. Okay, here's the thing. If there's a check mark in show error alert, we're always going to get that dialog box that tells the user, no, that's wrong, try this. So we'll never have invalid data entered into our cells. So we'll remove the check mark here, we'll choose OK. 15 meets the criteria, 51 doesn't meet the criteria. Let's go back and choose circle invalid data. There we go. And of course, you can clear your validation circles. I do want to point out that all of the invalid data in your spreadsheet will be circled at once when you choose circle invalid data. and all of your circles will be removed if I had more than one. But if I were to change this back to 12 and then break the rules again, whoops, it's not going to it's not going to recircle that information. So this isn't a way to indicate to you immediately, hey, there's errors in my spreadsheet. It's something that you have to think about, go out and seek to see where your invalid data does exist. That's why sometimes the dialog boxes are a better way, because you're preventing bad data from even getting into your spreadsheet. But sometimes in the workflow, you have to allow bad data so you can get through a whole task, a whole piece of the work, and then you can go back, test the information, and see if there was a problem. Of course, a lot of you probably are dealing with spreadsheets that have been created previously, and they're chocked full of data, so you can't prevent bad data. Instead, you just have to set up some of these data validation rules and then test the information to see if it is correct. Our goal, of course, is to make sure that our spreadsheets are full of data integrity. Garbage in, garbage out, as they always say, and we want to prevent that, or at least reduce it as much as we possibly can. We were all about data integrity here. We made sure that we could audit our formulas. We traced the precedents, the dependents. We even opened up that watch window so we could see what was happening to a formula that was perhaps far away within our spreadsheet. Not only did we do that, but we even limited the type of data that we allowed into our spreadsheet. We created a dialog box via the data validation command that told our users, actually, hey, values must be greater than 0. We also were able to create a drop-down list, which would, of course, prevent bad data entry, because everybody who's entering data into that spreadsheet can actually know what it is they're supposed to type and even select it instead of having to attempt to type in one of those nasty SKU numbers. All of this is so that your spreadsheets have valid information, so that when you're creating those reports or making those analyses, that you know, hey, I'm basing this off of good, clean information. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.